My name is Terrence Barkin, the Executive Director of the Advanced Carbons Council. Many of you will know me or might be familiar with me as the Executive Director of the Graphene Council. The Graphene Council was founded in August of 2013, and so is now more than 11 years old and has grown to an enormous community of 36,000 materials professionals working with graphene and other allotropes of carbon. And just recently, we have expanded our focus from graphene to include other allotropes of carbon, hence the Advanced Carbons Council. All members of the Graphene Council are entitled to and considered members of the Advanced Carbons Council. There's no additional charge for those members of the Graphene Council to be engaged in the Advanced Carbons Council. And the rationale for this we'll talk about today, but basically it's that many of these carbons work in synergistic ways with each other, and so it made sense to be able to include some of these other forms of carbon. Just to give you some disclaimers, we will talk about projected and anticipated sizes of markets, both production and demand, and to the extent that we may talk about individual companies or give any kind of indications about markets, our disclaimer is that these are not to be taken as recommendations on investment or on any financial status of companies. This is purely for information. We believe our information to be reliable, but we cannot guarantee it. So that is the disclaimers that you should be familiar with. So the Advanced Carbons Council, the mission is to promote the smart use and application of advanced carbons. As an organization, we are the only trade body that encompasses all advanced carbons under one roof to connect them and to foster beneficial relationships between these different types of materials, and also for the users of these materials to have a broader swath of information that's delivered in a consistent manner. We do have over 35,000, it's closer to 37,000 individuals that are within our ecosystem that are advanced materials professionals. These are mostly people working within commercial enterprises and companies that actually are looking on how to use these materials. And then, of course, we do have the companies that produce graphene and other advanced carbon materials, which we'll talk about now. So the advanced carbon material sector is really, especially now because of several trends with sustainability, reduction of embedded CO2, and with the drive to electrify transportation, for example, amongst a few, not to mention resiliency and improving infrastructure. Advanced materials are absolutely necessary. And I've said for a long time, the problems that we face today were created in part by legacy materials, and it's not legacy materials that are going to help solve it, but materials that have step change improvement in performance so that they're stronger, they last longer, they use less energy, or they help other materials to reduce the amount of embedded carbon in them. So when we talk about advanced carbons, which is quite broad, what are we actually talking about? Our definition and where we will focus as an organization is on graphene, which is the genesis of our organization. As I mentioned, in August 2013, we founded the Graphene Council and have been extremely successful in growing that community and supporting those that both produce and use graphene materials. We've developed industry standards, which we've then licensed to ISO. We've done material testing and characterization. We've helped facilitate connections between investors and nascent graphene companies, and we've helped graphene companies find and engage with customers, and customers find and engage with reputable graphene supply chain partners. And our mission will remain the same, just to the extent it will encompass other forms of carbon, and that includes carbon nanotubes, carbon fiber, synthetic and engineered graphite. And what we mean by that is natural graphite that has been manipulated and changed in order to meet a particular use case. So, for example, it could be natural graphite that's been turned into spherical graphite for energy storage devices. Carbon composites, which if anybody's not familiar with those, we'll explain that a little bit more what carbon composites is. Carbon nanofibers, which are not the same as carbon fiber, but one could confuse the two. Fullerenes, or otherwise known as buckyballs, MXenes, which transition metals and carbon nanomaterials, carbon nanodiamonds, and lastly, a category for recycled and reclaimed carbons. And I'll explain what that is, what that encompasses, and why it's included in our definition of advanced carbon materials. So if we look at some of the major trends that are driving the need for innovative new materials to solve some of society's most challenging problems, there is a global drive to lower CO2 emissions and reduce embedded carbon, either from the production of materials or in the use and application of those materials. And so there is a tremendous business opportunity to help answer that question. And that means coming up with materials that help other existing products to reduce their carbon footprint. And in parallel to that, and in part driven by that same impulse, is the drive for renewable energy. And we know that wind energy is one of the fastest growing sectors globally. Solar energy also is rapidly gaining in terms of percentage of the total energy production capacity worldwide. And that will not stop. That is going to continue. The question is how fast or how slow that continues to advance, but it's not going backwards. Clean water is an issue for all of the planet, and that will continue to be an acute problem as water sources are fought over, and there's a need for clean, sustainable, renewable sources of water. And of course, the not too distant now pandemic reemphasized how interrelated global health is, and we need better diagnostic tools that are more accurate, more pervasive, and more accessible to help anticipate or prevent pandemics in the future and to provide a higher level of health care for all of the planet. So these are some really big macro issues that are driving business worldwide. And these are the kinds of issues that advanced carbon materials are ideally suited to address. We need sustainable solutions for a whole array of applications. And this is just a snapshot. This is by no means comprehensive, but if we look at all of the different areas, and this is true and has been true for graphene, and it's true for other advanced carbons, carbon is such an amazing element in that it can be used in so many different ways. And for those of you who are from the graphene sector or from some of these other advanced carbon sectors, you will be quite familiar with this in terms of carbon being able to use to add strength, to convey heat, to convey electrical current, to be used as a sensing platform, and much, much, much more. And so this is why it's so amazing. And we believe, and this is really the impetus of the Advanced Carbons Council and why we've gone in this direction, is that not only are some of these advanced carbons amazing on their own, they're even more amazing when they're used in combination. So if we look at graphene, which was the foundation that we've been built on, graphene, if anybody is not familiar with graphene at this point, graphene is a single layer of sp2 bonded carbon and a lattice structure. And we, as the Graphene Council, and now as the Advanced Carbons Council, have been working with standards bodies for close to a decade now. According to the ISO, the International Standards Organization standards, graphene includes material that is up to and inclusive of 10 layers of carbon. It includes materials like graphene oxide, reduced graphene oxide, and there are functionalized or enhanced or modified forms of graphene that are also included in this. And for those of you who have an interest in graphene, it's important to note that the most recent ISO technical specification is due for publication either still this month, January 2025, or by the end of February, but this will be coming out. And that's the culmination of years of work within our organization and from over 100 volunteers to create the graphene classification framework, which is now going to be an official ISO technical specification. And that kind of approach, where we bring a standard to help promote the market, is exactly what we'd like to do for these other materials if that's what the stakeholders feel is needed. With graphene, it's an amazingly versatile material. There are more than 45 major vertical markets that we have identified for graphene. And today, graphene production capacity is about 25,000 metric tons per annum. And there's a market there with graphene being commercialized and put into commercial application and market of about 200 million on the revenue side. For anybody who has a deep interest in graphene, there is a dedicated site for the Graphene Council. And we also have a very extensive graphene report called the Graphene Report, naturally. And it comes in 3 volumes and it's over 700 pages, covering standards, production methods, market trends, profiling 250 graphene companies, and it discusses and describes all of the applications for which graphene is suited. If we look at our next material, carbon nanotubes, like graphene, comes in various flavors. Carbon nanotubes are also sp2 bonded carbon and have been described as rolled up graphene. They are a distinct different material, where graphene has now been around for 20 years from the first date of isolation till today. Carbon nanotubes are about 30 years in existence. And for the longest time, carbon nanotubes struggled to develop a market. There were many reasons for that, one of which was it was a very fragmented market. There wasn't any kind of concerted, organized effort to really promote the material or to organize it in the way we had done for graphene, et cetera. But now, 30 years later, we find carbon nanotubes are being widely adopted, especially in lithium-ion battery chemistries. And so today, the actual market for carbon nanotubes is 20,000 metric tons per annum, which even at a low price of $50 per kilo, and I'm not suggesting that that's the price, but if you just want to do a quick back of the envelope calculation, that's $1 billion market. And it's been calculated as much as 6.5, depending on the price of these carbon nanotubes. There are multi-wall carbon nanotubes and there are single-wall carbon nanotubes. The vast bulk of the market is in the multi-wall carbon nanotube format. Single-wall carbon nanotubes have similar properties or better properties in some cases and are also more expensive. We have a carbon nanotube report. So we have, prior to the launch of the Advanced Carbons Council, researched the market, and we've identified which companies are actively in the market today. There are many market reports for all of these materials. This one has been verified which companies are actually active today. There's about 125 companies in the carbon nanotube market. And these reports, the graphene report and the carbon nanotube report, are respectively included in the corporate memberships if one joins the Advanced Carbon Council for those particular materials. Now, if we look at the next market, which is quite interesting, carbon fiber, which everyone would be familiar with as a major application in aerospace, in wind blades, in sporting equipment, carbon fiber, also in race cars like Formula One, et cetera. Carbon fiber is really an amazing material as well. There are many, many types of carbon fiber. There's differences in the quality of the fiber itself, and then the number of individual fibers in a particular strand, known as the tow, differs quite a bit. It could be 5,000, it could be 10,000, it could be 100,000 fibers in a tow, and these all have different characteristics and qualities. So carbon fiber right now, because of its high strength and lightweight, is primarily used in aerospace. It is used in automotive. It is used especially in wind blades, which is one of the fastest growing sectors. And this market, which has been around for quite a while, is dominated by a relatively small number of companies, about a dozen companies that are in the carbon fiber production side. And this is one of these markets where we see that there are going to be new entrants into carbon fiber production. And there is also going to be an increased demand for carbon fiber in markets that are maybe less demanding than, say, aerospace, but could make good use of carbon fiber if it becomes more accessible to some of those markets. And we are producing a carbon fiber market report that is currently in process, and that will be available relatively soon. Carbon fiber, just to give you one example of how some of these materials can interact with one another, graphene and carbon nanotubes together in battery material is often better or more effective than either of them by themselves. And with carbon fiber, not only do you have virgin carbon fiber material, but once these wind blades or other materials reach their end of life, these carbon fibers can be reclaimed. Now, the reclaimed carbon fiber market also can benefit from having graphene, for example, added to the carbon fiber as a sizing or a coating agent to those fibers to improve their performance. And this is just another tangible example of where one advanced carbon material can enhance another. So if we move to the next topic, it's going to be synthetic and engineered graphite. Graphite obviously is a material that's been around for many decades and is used in a really wide range of applications. Graphite by itself is not necessarily an advanced carbon material. It occurs naturally, and it can also be synthetically produced. What we are going to focus on in the Advanced Carbons Council is those forms of graphite that are either synthetically produced or where natural graphite has been engineered or manipulated to increase its performance for a specific high value application. So there is a portion of the graphite market, natural flake, commoditized, commodity level type graphite is not something that we are going to cover, but we will cover these more advanced forms of the graphite material. And of course, graphite is a precursor or can be a precursor for the production of other advanced carbons, including graphene, for example. And so there are some synergies there as well. Graphite is used in a really broad array as well. Very typical common material for battery storage or battery chemistries, as well as electrical anodes for production of steel or aluminum and other applications. So this is another market that we will cover, and it's a very important one in two directions. One, a lot of graphite producers would like to find higher, better, more valuable uses for their materials. And for those making advanced carbons and looking at graphite as a potential feedstock, finding good, high quality, reliable sources as a feedstock that's at a commercially acceptable price would be another direction that we can go with helping that market. Carbon composites. This is a carbon fiber in another carbon matrix that has been then carbonized or crystallized so that they're embedded together. And these are some very high value, very niche, very specific markets. This would include the nozzles for rockets, which if anybody's just watching the trends, private commercial space market is rapidly growing, and that is going in one direction. We don't see that reversing. And you also have very high performance brakes. If you think of the brake pads and the brake components on aircraft, which you have to bring this very large aircraft to a halt on a runway, or in specialty use like race cars, etc. Very high temperature, very low thermal dynamics where it does not expand or contract rapidly with changes in the temperature. These are some of the characteristics of carbon composites. And so this is obviously a very advanced form and highly engineered form of carbon materials. And this is actually bringing carbon fiber together with another carbon matrix to embed it and to create these products. So this is included within our portfolio of materials that we will cover. Carbon nanofibers. This is not carbon fiber necessarily. This is something different, but carbon nanofibers, small nanostructures with sp2 bonded carbon. And one of the companies that we do have in the Graphene Council and now in the Advanced Carbon Council is a company called Carbon Nova, which creates carbon nanofibers, which includes an element. It's not graphene, but it's also a unique kind of hybrid sp2 bonded carbon, and it makes these unique carbon nanofiber materials. So this type of material is its own distinct category, if you will. It's similar to, but different from carbon fiber and from graphene and from carbon nanotubes. It's not a cylindrical, it's a different type of morphology with these materials. And so we see again applications like energy storage, like sensing applications, like thermal transport, a different morphology of carbon, and now we have a home for these kind of materials. The next category I would like to talk about is there's a whole series of very niche, unique, cutting edge, evolving nanomaterials. One of them is MaxScenes. We did have a MaxScene dedicated association, which is now embedded in the Advanced Carbons Council. So we will cover this material. MaxScenes are transition metal carbides that have carbon as a base layer in their sandwich. And as such, it is an advanced carbon material that's combined with the transition metals to make an atomically thin 5-layer, 3-layer, 7 layers material, which can have different terminal chemistries on the outside of it. And they have some unique energy storage applications or conductive applications. This market for MaxScenes, there are a handful of companies that have started commercial production, so it's at a very early stage, but this is important to monitor. This is the same as any other material. You have an initial phase, and this is kind of where MaxScenes are. And then you have buckyballs or the fullerene model. And then there are other morphologies of carbon that aren't really well defined, for which there are no standards or maybe not commonly understood. And these could be nanospheres or onions or turbostratic sp2 bonded carbon that doesn't really conform to some of these other materials, or in an aerogel or three-dimensional format. And we have a home for all of these. We'd like to bring these into the community so that we understand them. And again, a big motivation for this is that we have companies that are making carbon nanotubes and some other morphology of carbon, or graphene and some other forms of carbon. And so we think it's important not to ignore them and to see where they fit in the whole scope of things. And so we will monitor all of this and collate this. And this is kind of what I think is the advantage of going to the Advanced Carbon Council model, is that whether you're a producer or you're a consumer and you're looking to solve some specific engineering problems, there's a broad spectrum of materials that might be available to you. And then there are other considerations, not only technical, but commercial, to be able to find a reliable supplier of these materials. And also, as these materials evolve, to have the ability to have the materials tested and characterized so that you know that you're getting what you're told you're getting. There's another application area for carbon nanodiamonds. This is a very well-established, very, very large market. For example, using carbon nanodiamonds for polishing and finishing metals, but it's also used, quite interestingly, in the pharmaceutical industry as a drug delivery device. So it's a very unique, very different market. So you have, again, carbon in the form of diamonds at the nanoscale, and then they have terminations or coatings on them that enable them to be specifically used for things, like I said, with pharmaceutical delivery vehicles. They're used in that case simply because they can be used to help slow release a medicine, and they're highly well tolerated by the body as a diamond in that form. It doesn't interact, and it's well tolerated. So the last application area that I want to talk about is reclaimed and recycled carbons. And I'd like to spend just a moment on why we're addressing it in this way. We have seen examples of companies that are recycling plastic materials to produce synthetic oils, for example, or synthetic fuels. And they end up having a very large amount of physical carbon residue, which right now it's not entirely clear what utility it has or how it can be used, but there's a definite interest to not just bury it as landfill. And then we have companies that are rushing to the hydrogen production sector because of government programs and incentives and an evolving market for hydrogen production. And these companies are focused on the hydrogen side of the production, and then they realize they have a rather significant volume of physical carbon as a residue. And that material could have utility as a soil augmentation material, which is certainly of value, but not a high market value. Or that material could be further processed into higher value advanced carbons. And the other area that we're very interested to address is on carbon sequestration. There is an enormous market in mandatory carbon credits, depending on what jurisdiction you're in. In the United States, there's not a federal program, but it's individual states like California or Oregon have mandatory carbon markets. You have the European Union has a mandatory carbon market, et cetera, and there's other jurisdictions. And then you also have voluntary carbon markets where companies or individuals would like to offset their carbon footprint and they buy carbon credits. This market has been driven primarily by capture and sequestration, where CO2 is recovered as a waste material, and then it's mineralized and buried in the ground. We think that carbon credits are a very good mechanism to help reduce the output of embedded CO2 or atmospheric CO2. We think capture and sequestration and burying it in the ground is a very poor use of that tool because there's no economic driver for that. Nobody's going to pay you to capture CO2 and put it in the ground unless there was a mandatory legislative reason to do so, or if there was financial incentive in the forms of government subsidies to do so. There's no native commercial impetus there. And so this is another area we would like to look at in having carbon credits available to those in the community that are making physical carbons, advanced carbons that actually have utility. That's where we think the incentive should go, is to actually make something that works instead of making something just to be buried. So that's another part of the reclaimed and recycled carbons. And of course, I mentioned briefly with carbon fiber, which is a very high value product, but at the end of life, those carbon fibers are reclaimed. And now what do you do with the reclaimed materials? So that market needs organization and promotion and standards and testing and validation, et cetera. And we think more and more there are going to be markets of reclaimed and recycled carbons, and it should have some organization to it so that it is a durable, trusted, bona fide market. So this is the overview of what the Advanced Carbons Council is covering as an entity. We're at the early days. We're a week and 1 day old as of today. But we really think advanced carbons, based on our experience with graphene and our understanding of all of these other advanced forms of carbon, is really an important area for us to focus on. And we were very excited about working on it. And we've already seen in just the last week, we've had a number of companies join the Advanced Carbons Council to be part of this journey. So why would anybody join the Advanced Carbons Council? Well, market intelligence. We have networking opportunities with in-person meetings, the next of which will be the 8th of July in Birmingham, UK, and then we'll be in Columbus, Ohio in September. And then we have webinars and other forms of information exchange as well. We do represent the industry as needed on particular issues. We can help with regulatory approvals. We've done that with our graphene colleagues, and we'll do the same with other sectors. We also offer testing and characterization services if anybody would like to have their material validated, or you need a technical data sheet for your material, or you would also like to have an exposure study done in your facility. These are all things that we can do. We also invite companies to engage with us on a voluntary basis to talk about standards, if that's what you need for your sector. And we know that for some of the advanced materials, there are few to no standards for the materials. There's tremendous fragmentation. and there are going to be issues that are common to all of the stakeholders in that particular sector, including for the consumers and the customers for those materials. And as the Advanced Carbon Council, we will support the involvement of groups to work on those standards. And so they're volunteer-led, and we act as a supporting structure for that activity. So for all these reasons, we encourage you to visit the website and to consider joining the Advanced Carbon Council to take advantage of the intelligence that you can have, the exposure that you can get for your company, and the work that we can do to advance these markets together. So with that, I'm going to conclude our presentation. There is some information below where you can visit our website. You can contact us. I'm going to stop sharing my screen at this point. And of course, the first question, thank you for that, from one of our colleagues. We try to avoid discussing politics, but that's almost unavoidable in today's environment. So the question that I received is, how do you assess the impact of Trump's shift away from sustainability on the advancement of advanced carbon materials? I suppose that's a very appropriate question at this time, and I'll just give you an opinion. I have no special insight into this. I only have an opinion about it. But if I look at the global trends, and you can't ignore, for example, the European Union and the size of that economic market, nor can you ignore the trends with our neighbors to the north in Canada or anywhere else in the world. The trend is toward sustainability. The trend is toward, these advanced materials. And if anything's driving what's going to happen in the United States over the next period, it's going to be economic. And whether one believes in global warming or whether one is a skeptic of all this, there is a market to be had for more sustainable, more energy efficient products globally. So just from the economic opportunity, regardless of what your particular view is on those other topics, I think there's definitely a market here. And the other thing is that these advanced carbon materials operate on their own merits in terms of utility and improved performance versus price, irregardless of what government policy might be. So obviously there's going to be a shift in that direction, but I would say that shift is not a reversal of the trends that are happening globally. We did ask if somebody would like to get a copy of the slide. Of course, we'll make the slides available and we'll send a link to the recording. And then another question, and we've had this before, I just want to make sure that it's absolutely clear. The question was, has the Graphene Council no longer operational? It is absolutely operational. We run these things in parallel. It would be quite obvious that at some point these groups would be one. But the Graphene Council, we've worked on the Graphene Council for 11 years to build a tremendous database of resource and capability there, and that continues unimpeded going forward. These are running in parallel while we stand up these other carbon materials. So another question from the audience: for the carbonaceous material testing, was the elemental composition measured in their bulk, or was it a surface measurement? Of course, the elemental composition in bulk seems inappropriate in the case of graphene materials. So when we do material testing, we do chemical analysis and composition of the material. There's a TGA method for doing that, or XPS method for doing that. We also look at the physical morphology of the material. We look at in the case of graphene, there's 19 characteristics that we actually test and measure. So the analysis we do is extremely thorough, and we work with first-class labs to do that kind of material characterization and testing. Another question is regarding the membership. Is it available to individual members and independent consultants? Our mandate is working with the stakeholder groups that both produce and use graphene and other advanced materials. Membership in the Advanced Carbon Council is only available to organizations, entities, so that would be companies. We do accept membership from universities or other type of organizations, but it's for companies. How many companies are registered yet for the ACC? Well, we've had 1 week of existence, and we've had 5 companies join in the past week, so that's not a bad trend. What has been the best method for developing capital partnerships for scale up in production, SPACs, or private equity, venture capital, et cetera? It's an interesting question. So I can speak to what we know about the markets and the companies that are involved. As an industry gets more mature and larger, I'm thinking here of the carbon fiber sector, you have less than 24 companies that dominate the production side of the carbon fiber market. On the other hand, with graphene, we have over 250 companies that are active in producing graphene. In carbon nanotubes, it's about half of that, about 125. Most of these advanced carbon companies were founded by friends and family, angel investment, private money. Some of them have gone public and raised public funds. The vast majority of them are privately held companies. We have not, at least not to my knowledge, seen anybody using SPACs. So this is a special vehicle using an existing listed company to make an acquisition in the space. If anybody's not familiar with what a SPAC, S-P-A-C is. We do have, and I would say this, as the Graphene Council and as the Advanced Carbon Council, we have worked on a number of acquisition and due diligence projects where we provided technical due diligence. In other words, a private equity company or a large industrial company says we would like to make an acquisition or a strategic investment in one of these companies. Can you give us an opinion about their material? Do they actually produce graphene or is it some other material, et cetera? So we will continue to do that. We do not give investment advice, but we can do technical due diligence and give our opinion and insight on the companies that are in the sector. And because we work with company owners every day, literally every day, we talk to them, we are familiar which companies are open to accepting investment and some insights on that. So we can certainly help with that if anybody has an interest on the investment side. And we have actually hosted 3 dedicated investor conferences to connect investors with potential markets. So from one of the questions, the Graphene Council produces an excellent newsletter covering graphene announcements and developments. Will the Advanced Carbon Council distribute a similar newsletter segmented by allotropes? And the answer is absolutely yes, and we've already started that. The best thing to do is visit the website, and that's advmat.org, O-R-G, and you will be prompted to sign up for a newsletter, and you'll get actually 2 prompts. The first prompt asks for your contact information and which material you're interested in. And then as you exit the site, you'll be asked again for your email address, and you'll have a list of application areas: automotive, construction, plastics, coatings, et cetera. And we will put out newsletters. We're already putting out, actually this morning, the Carbon Nanotube newsletter went out. So you can sign up for any of those newsletters and information, and absolutely we're already set up to deliver all of that. And we will do exactly the same like we've done with graphene for all of these other allotropes. So one of the questions here, thanks for the nice presentation, is your slide taken from a research paper or directed work? We have a team of material experts that we work with internally that are part of the Graphene Council and now the Advanced Carbon Council. And we've done our research to put together the figures that are here. And this comes from talking to companies directly, as well as looking at other points of data that are available to us on these markets. There is a question asking, which sector should I choose in terms of advanced material composites to drive revenue? We don't give that kind of advice, but we can talk about the markets. And certainly for companies that are members of the Advanced Carbons Council and the Graphene Council, if you have questions about different markets or technology, that's part of the value of being a member, is we can have conversations with you about what we're seeing in the market and doing these kind of market assessments. I do see this. If you look at what's happening with energy storage, you look at composites, you look at aerospace, you look at health, you look at the need for advanced sensing, thermal management, reduction of embedded CO2 in things like concrete and cement. There are so many opportunities where these carbon materials have opportunity for growth. It's hard to kind of fathom. And we made a distinction with advanced carbons versus commoditized forms of carbon. Somebody hasn't asked the question yet, but somebody may, is, why do we not cover carbon black, for example? Well, carbon black, which is a very widely used material, it's also a very commoditized material, and it's not very differentiated, and it has some other issues with it. We don't consider carbon black to be in the advanced carbons sector, although one could argue it could be. But that's just an obvious area. And if anything, lots of folks are working on ways to minimize the use of carbon black or to replace it. So that would be an example of a carbon that we are not really focused on as a distinction from what we do work on. So let me just see if I have to read a question first before I can answer it. So it's in order to avoid future political troublesomes here in the United States that may result in business problems for carbon producing companies in this council, suggest shifting to use less triggering language that will cause right-wing persons, etc. Okay. Well, we are apolitical. Okay, so we're focused on the technology, and I'm not going to change how we describe some of these materials for political correctness. I appreciate the advice. I don't want to sound confrontational with that. But sustainability and the demand for sustainability is not driven by whoever is in political power at the moment. It's also driven by consumer demand and needs. And if I were to look globally at the demand for sustainable product, that is not going away. So the winds of the day will shift, and sometimes they'll be more positive, sometimes they'll be less positive. We are going to focus on the technical aspects, the scientific aspects, the business utility of these materials, and whether they make economic sense. I already mentioned that when we talk about carbon credits, we're going to focus on using carbon credits for materials that actually have commercial utility as opposed to burying them in the ground. Sustainability, however, and infrastructure resilience, however, these are durable concepts. So we think that's important to keep advocating for that. And, I don't see why that would be a problem. It did ask, somebody's asked if we've been involved with various nanomaterial conferences. We typically go to end user application conferences. For example, we're going to be at the UK Concrete Conference next month, or in March rather. We're going to be at JEC World for Composites again in March. We've been to CAMEX in the United States, again, for composites, and we attend other vertical markets. We tend actually not to go to nanomaterial conferences and such, which are primarily or often quite academic led. Instead, our focus has always been more on the commercial utility of these materials, and we will continue with the Advanced Carbon Council to focus on the commercial application of these materials. We do monitor scientific developments, and we do cover them in our newsletter. However, we're not an academic focus, rather we're a commercially focused entity. And we do have our own conferences. So we're going to be at the Advanced Material Show in Birmingham, UK in July, and we will have an Advanced Carbons Council and a Graphene Council meeting at that time on July the 8th. And we'll be in Columbus, Ohio on 29th September. And we will be attending the Carbon Fiber Conference in November in Wichita, Kansas, for example. And I believe we're coming down to some of the last remarks here. Somebody's asked, how to get into the graphene market for someone who does not know where to start. I guess my question would be, when you say get into the graphene market, does that mean as a producer? We already have 250 companies producing graphene. If anybody would like to have a one-on-one conversation about some of the challenges to enter, establish, and commercialize in that market at this stage, I'd be happy to have a conversation with you. But it's more than just making the material. Let me say that there's a lot of market development that has to go into this, and I think that's true. And anybody in the carbon nanotube space will tell you as well. Carbon nanotubes spent about 25 years in the wilderness, and only recently, in the last couple of years, have they really developed some significant volume, and that has been hard won. So it just depends on the market dynamics for the particular material and what you're trying to achieve with it. Question about the concrete conference. I would say if you look at our recent newsletter, and if you follow what we're going to present at the UK conference, the UK Concrete Conference, there are a lot of announcements of graphene making it into commercial products. And we actually did a research project with the University of Southern Mississippi at the Mississippi Polymer Institute, where we actually facilitated the incorporation of graphene into a concrete pour that they had down there for a facility. So there's a lot happening. I know that there have been skeptics about graphene in concrete as an application, but there have been a lot of announcements lately, and there are more on their way of actually putting graphene into concrete. And for those who are not familiar with it, the main objective there is because graphene can enhance the physical properties of the concrete mix, you can use less cement in the mix to reach the same strength. And every kilo of cement you reduce from a concrete mix is a kilo of CO2 that you've reduced. So there's a big incentive for green cement or low embedded carbon concrete rather. And using graphene is one way to get there. So I'm going to, I think I've got one or two more questions, and then I think we'll close this off. For recycled carbon fiber, most reclamation processes are not clean, can be costly, etc. It's also difficult to use the recycled carbon fiber for the same application as the reclamation process results in a, I'm quoting the question here, mangled mess rather. Taking that into account, how limited are the applications for recycled carbon fiber? Let me just say this: the recycled carbon fiber, and I would really, it's almost better to say reclaimed rather than recycled, because it's reclaimed as it is, but liberated from its composite structure. The reclaimed carbon fiber market, or secondhand carbon fiber market, if you will, also constitutes off-spec material that comes from primary producers. So that's another large component. There is a large but extremely fragmented and not organized market for these reclaimed, reused carbon fibers. And the reason is, for example, those carbon fiber materials can be chopped and then used as a chopped carbon fiber reinforcement agent in composites and can be very good. The problem is consistency in the product from a supplier, because the reclaimed material can vary widely in its actual quality. And this is an area, again, where materials like graphene can be used to enhance and also to smooth out the variations in quality of these reclaimed carbon fibers. And if you can do that, you also increase their value. So this is just an example of, we don't have the answer, but we have a path to the answer. And that's what we try to do as the Advanced Carbons Council, as the Graphene Council, is we try to work with experts in the community and stakeholders in the community to identify what issues need addressing, and then we work to help you guys address it, and then you can go on with your commercial activity. So I appreciate the question. Reclaimed and recycled carbon fiber is not going away. So the real issue is, how do we address some of the shortfalls in that market to improve it? And just a comment from one of our existing members in the Graphene Council, they have a material that's carbon nano onions. So that's another format or morphology. And we're just sharing that they've had success in putting that material into concrete, for example. So with that, I want to thank everybody who's attended today. I hope this was informative. I hope we see the utility in bringing all of these advanced carbon materials under an umbrella to work with one another, to work on common issues, and to help promote the use of these materials so that we end up with products that are better, stronger, lighter, use less energy, they last longer, and are just better products. And advanced carbons are not the only solution, but they're a very good solution. And we think we have a very virtuous circle of taking waste carbon or other waste materials that have a high carbon content, and instead of burning it, throwing it away, burying it in the ground, we turn it into another product that has utility. And in order to turn that into a commercial entity, you need standards, you need quality, you need consistency. We need to educate the end users and the customers that these materials can be good for what they're trying to do. And all of that takes a collective effort. And that's what we do. So with that, I want to thank you for your time and your attention. I encourage you to visit our website, advmat.org, and you can sign up for a newsletter based on the material you're interested in or on the application area you're interested in, or both, of course. And then you'll receive our information, our newsletters that come out on this. So thank you all very much, and we appreciate the community, and we're here to help work with you to make sure you guys are successful in your businesses. So thanks again. Take care.